That's Debatable is sponsored by MB&G. MB&G is specialists in the esoteric world of vehicle and furniture warranty insurance, delivering quite marvellous customer service, prompt claims payment, and a highly developed understanding of how to deliver these products in a way that is both compliant with the regulations and attractive to customers. To find out more, call Paul Smith, the Managing Director, on 07887 501 441. That's 07887 501 441.
Hello and welcome to That's Debatable, the weekly podcast of the Free Speech Union with me, Jan McVarish, and Connie Shaw, who's here this week. Hi, Connie.
Hi, Jan.
Very sad week and, a very mixed week, but obviously with this overwhelmingly sad news about the assassination of Charlie Kirk. So we're obviously going to start off with that news. And I wanted to ask you, Connie, really, a lot of people have been saying, people more my age have been saying, oh, I didn't really know much about him. And it's actually, I heard about it through my children. And so I wondered, we thought it'd be good to hear from you what he meant to people who were already interested in free speech, but also to a lot of other people who were aware of him because of the social media content he'd been putting out there for so long. What's your take?
He was just this formidable person who, regardless of what he was saying or who he was debating, his ability to debate and his openness to debating anyone was the thing that made him so incredible. And for a lot of people, there needed to be something where that space was opened on campus because as we all know, universities, not just in the UK, but in the US as well, have become places where, ironically, debate isn't always welcomed. And he was doing there couldn't have been a better way to literally just sit at a table and invite people to debate. And one thing about Charlie Kirk that no one can deny, and if they are denying it, then it's just then they haven't watched any of his videos, that he was the most respectful person to no matter anyone that he was debating. You can watch any clip and he'll be calming down the audience, many of whom would be his fans, and he would say, doesn't matter who you're debating, be respectful, don't say horrible things, don't make this personal, let's just debate each other's views. And he would often have people come up to the mic and just verbally abuse him, basically say horrible things about him, how much they hated him. And he would just sit there and take it and would say to them, would you like to have a conversation about what it is that you think that is hateful about me? And he was just an extraordinarily top shelf example of how to go about debating. And I think a lot of people, if people who maybe older people who aren't on platforms like TikTok and Instagram won't be used to how algorithms work, where his videos were because they were so lively, these debates, his videos were massive, and he had such a big outreach that you'd see one video, and like you were just saying to me, Jan, before we started recording, how you see one and you like one video and then you start seeing so many. And he was this constant presence on social media when it came to debating and free speech. And I never watched his show, the Charlie Kirk show, but I would always watch the clips of when he'd debate students. And that's why he's so widely known amongst young people, because you're just scrolling and you see those debates and you know who Charlie Kirk is, even if you don't actually watch his videos. And I think a lot of young people learn. I mean, I learned a lot by the way that he debated. And when Maeve and I set up the stall on campus in Leeds, that was very much inspired by his method of inviting people to have an open conversation.
Did you have any reservations about the style? Did you have any reservations? I know when I was watching, a lot of these kind of Facebook reels would come up with the short clips of the the kind of, and sometimes I don't like gotchas, and I especially don't like it, and especially as somebody who is older, is a parent and has taught young people, I'm when I first started seeing him come up, I thought, I don't like this thing of setting up young people almost for global exposure, which is what that is, where somebody is exposed as articulating the most stupid of ideas or the most intolerant of ideas, and of being underprepared, or, really being totally owned, if you like. There was it kind of came out of that whole culture of owning libs basically and sort of showing them up to be stupid and ill-informed, and the arguments to be inconsistent. But then the more you watch, that you're right, you do see these other encounters where he talks to somebody in a way that there's clearly more going on there than just the kind of social media capture.
I get what you mean about the owning culture, and what Charlie's work sort of symbolised was that although he was broadcasting people who would put across really bad arguments often, I think what was quite important was that he was giving young people the opportunity to do that, regardless of whether they came across as silly. I think it's important to give young people the respect that they want. Like, they willingly went up to the mic and put across their arguments. And I think a lot of the time that's why this culture has been created on campuses, because it's that the status quo has been established without there being much debate about whether it's right or wrong. And by allowing the students to come and put forward their arguments in favour of what has been established as status quo, then they are being given the respect that they want. And sorry, I'm not articulating this very well, but it just, I think that what I really liked about it, and I think was very important for lots of other people, because he was giving those opportunities to young people. He wasn't trying to, I don't think he was trying to own people. That genuinely was just the outcome of some of those debates. And obviously the ones where the students did lose the debate, so to speak, those videos would go more viral. There would be the ones that you see more, because it is that, they got owned. But ultimately Charlie was just giving them the opportunity. And these are university students, they may be young people and you may feel bad for them, but they still had that experience. And I think that's the important thing. They know that they're being broadcast, and, lots of these people go up to the mic being with a lot of hubris. And I think often that can be really important for these young people to experience pushback and have a very robust debate with someone who's very, very good at debating, because I think that's what a lot of students haven't had the experience of, and they think that their opinions they're not even political. They think that they're just, their personal opinions aren't political, they're just right.
Yes, I think that's really right. And I think the other thing was that you could tell that because they hadn't debated the ideas that they held, they had no idea what the other side was really. They only could come, like, hubris is a good word for that. It is that, and it's because they had never had to test their ideas. And so when they actually were up against somebody who, he didn't even need to be that great. It was just the fact that he was putting forward the ideas in the real way, rather than the caricatured way that they'd only ever heard of before. So, and in a very human way. And he was incredibly attractive. And a kind of, he was one of these people, the more you looked at him and the more you sort of saw his face, the more that you sort of saw in it, and the kind of warmth in it and all of that. And he was very much like a kind of a youth pastor, which is the type that, we don't really have them in Britain, but I used to teach a lot of American students, and a lot of them were pastors in their evangelical churches. And he was very familiar like that, where there's just this warmth and a kind of lot of love that comes out from those people, and they are taking responsibility for people younger than themselves. And at a certain point when he started, it would have been his peer group, because he was so young when he started. But then obviously into his late 20s and only being 31 now, it was that sense of taking responsibility for the younger generation, which, I think all of that's just brilliant. It is a brilliant thing. And I think that more than prove me wrong was invite debate as a kind of the meaning of what he was doing. But of course there was also all of the other, so the debating bit on campuses was one part of what he was doing, and it was hugely important. but then the other aspect of it was obviously all of the politics that kind of came from that, which was the conservative politics, in a very conventional way in lots of ways, but of course now seem incredibly radical. So to push back on DEI, to push back on trans ideology, to be pro-life, and I'm trying to think something, or gun control, all of those kinds of issues, which people are trying to use against him in a caricatured kind of way. They are all the issues, and I'd probably agree with him on 30% of the things he said. I mean, I massively disagree with him on abortion. Well, maybe not 30%, maybe it's higher. I agree with him probably on about 80%, perhaps. But, there are lots of things where when I would hear the arguments that he had with somebody, say, on abortion, I think, well, what would you say in response? What would you say? And I could formulate something, maybe not in the moment, standing in front of a microphone with thousands of people around me, but I like to think that there are considered arguments that were kind of provoked in your own head by watching what was being said. And so that was, I think it was, it's obviously a momentous moment. So what do you think? So for students or graduates who were maybe not obvious fans of his, but nevertheless were aware, do you think they will take a free speech lesson from it, do you think?
Perhaps. I mean, something I just wanted to come back quickly on something you said that I think made me realise what I was trying to articulate there, and my point about just because they're being owned or supposedly owned doesn't necessarily think is a bad thing, because even if that student is made out to look silly, it's still a very valuable experience for them, because like you say, they haven't had to defend their ideas because it's become the status quo. And I think that's what was so valuable, even though you might feel bad for these students and it might be seen as sort of taking advantage of students who have not, that's a very valuable experience for them, whether they liked it or not. And I've had those experiences myself where I've not questioned things, and suddenly, even if you're not being filmed and something happens, you think, God, yeah, why did I've not even thought about why I think these things. And like you say about his views on abortion, even though instinctively I disagree, it's really made me question my own thoughts about things. I'm an atheist, and I don't have the I don't have the religious side to him. Obviously that was the main thing for him that drove his politics. But it really did make me think. And it's really important to be able to challenge your own ideas. And that's what he did. And I think that for a lot of people, even those friends of mine who really don't agree, who are really quite left-wing, they are just devastated by this because of the freedom of speech aspect. Forget what his views were. What he was doing was so important, inviting free speech and free debate and open debate on campus, which was so important. And I think it shocked a lot of people. My friends and I often, we keep saying it's just so weird because we feel so emotional and grieving for someone that we've never met, and were the chances of ever meeting him were, and he's on the other side of the Atlantic, and it feels so strange to feel this upset about someone. And I feel the same, and my friends have said that we've never felt so upset about someone famous dying in this horrific way, because he was a symbol of something very important, regardless of whether you agreed with him or not. And I think that as well, people who do think that his views were really extreme, and I think especially in the UK, people don't understand this. People who haven't studied American politics don't know about the religious right. I mean, that is a staple of American politics. His views really aren't extreme. And I think that lots of young people don't understand sort of the differences in the political spectrum between America and the US, the UK and the US, because politics are sort of more shifted to the right.
Yeah.
The Democrats are more right-wing than Labour. And there is, the stronghold of the religious right is a very core part of American politics, and his views were very much in line with his faith.
Well, I think there's a lot about it that, on the one hand, it's made familiar because of social media. He does feel like somebody that because you've watched him a lot, you feel very connected to, and you probably identify with what he's doing. But on the other hand, there's something that is very different about America. I mean, the very fact that a political assassination is done by rifle from a rooftop, and it's absolutely catastrophically, just deadly immediately, is is kind of is in some ways quite alien to us. And obviously we know there have been lots of political assassinations in America's history. And I think in some ways it's a comparable moment to when JFK got shot for my mother's generation, who he had been put forward or was projected as a kind of source of hope and kind of national reinvigoration of youthfulness. And that sort of saying that my mother's generation over here kind of really liked, which was, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. That was very meaningful to people. And I think when he got assassinated and it was televised, I think probably quite a similar sort of a take on the issue over here as well, where it really resonated with people. And I think it's courage as well, isn't it? Courage is the thing that I've heard people say, where they've said, in fact, I went to the vigil on Whitehall on Friday night, where people were lighting candles and having speeches and things in memory of him. And quite a few people said, I feel like I've got no reason now to not say what I think. And I think that would be a brilliant legacy if all the people that have kind of went, I don't want to pay that price or this price. I'm not quite sure what the consequence will be if I say what I really think in whatever that setting that might be. Well, when somebody is literally martyred for being prepared to speak out and they have put their body on the line, because he always looked like he was vulnerable to that by being just out there in a very disarming way of kind of sitting with a microphone, rather than kind of being surrounded. He obviously did have security, but it obviously wasn't something that could really protect him. So that, I think that idea of just courage, kind of courage to the end, is very powerful to people. And I was looking up the old courage speaks to courage everywhere quote, and the second part of that is courage calls to courage everywhere, and its voice cannot be denied. And you think that's really, I think it is, hopefully there can be something really positive that comes from that, rather than just people being dismayed and disappointed and devastated and, just totally shocked by the awful reaction by those who have decided that this is something to be celebrated. I hope that there's a really strong reaction against that actually can bring together a much larger group of people who want to stand up for debate. I mean, do you want to just say what your take has been on some of these really, really horrendous reactions that are somehow celebrated?
It's so terrifying, and I think that it reminds me of Douglas Murray's. He once said that sometimes a flare goes up and you can see where everyone's standing, and this is one of those moments. And people that I went to school with, people that I went to university with, are saying these things, and it's not a fringe view. These are not people who sort of hang around on subreddits saying horrible things. This is educated young people in the UK who think that in some ways his murder was justified, and it's just astonishing. I can't get my head around it. I cannot get my head around it, and I'm for the first time truly quite terrified about the future of young people in particular, but just democracy in general, and how we are. We've been going on about polarization for many years now, about how polarized societies are, but this has just blown it absolutely out of the water, and it's just so hard to get your head around it. It's just unbelievable. And
I think
whoever it would have been devastating.
I mean, it is the callousness of it, the sort of it's shallow. It's very, very shallow. Well, at least I hope it's shallow. And I hope that when we say, I think you're right, that it does show where people stand, but I really hope also that it shows that they have to be moved. They have to be moved from where they stand at the moment, especially if they're young. Everybody can be moved from anything. We all know we've changed our minds on things, and we have to use this, I think, to change people's minds on where they've got to. Because I think just to sort of say, it's just a sign of the times and how terrible everything is. Yes. But we also have to use it the power of the moment, which is undeniable, that we have to use it to move people, literally move them from those positions where you can justify anything, and as long as it's against your as long as your tribe is being protected, somehow you justify anything, which also goes, I think we've Toby and various other people have made the point that this should not be the point at which cancel culture changes direction and comes for those people who are unable to appreciate the kind of the significance of this moment from a free speech point of view. We have to always think that people can be persuaded and changed, even if we despise them in the moment. And I do think especially with young people, we have to always see that we need to make sure they can be changed and moved. And which is not to say you don't really want very forceful arguments being used against them, like in the case of this Oxford Union president, who has cavalierly on a WhatsApp group said, just mocked the death of Charlie Kirk and said it was basically cheering it on. I hope that other students will turn against him and make it really clear that they don't stand with that. And if he is able to apologise sincerely at some point in the future, that's all to the good. But it doesn't really matter if he does or doesn't. What really matters is that lots of other people demand that he is not a representative of them.
I was a bit concerned at the reaction to that, because ultimately, like you say, it should be up to the other students to. I have no problem at all people highlighting what he said, because it was horrific. It wasn't just on a WhatsApp group; it's on his Instagram. He has thousands of about 3,000 followers, I saw, and he was putting it on his story, celebrating it. And he debated Charlie. He's met him. I
know. I mean, that's really incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, and like you were saying, and similar to how Toby argued, I think people forget, you do realise this works both ways. Imagine if this was someone that you really liked. How would you feel, and what would you think about people celebrating the death of one of your political heroes? It's just unconscionable. And
also, for all my talk of, we must be open to young people changing their minds, of course, the shooter was 22. So, who's to say which student will, here they're obviously not going to shoot somebody, but, for years now, the slogan has been punch a Nazi, punch a TERF, this kind of violent language that can often seem quite unconvincing because the people that are saying it are so weak and unimpressive, and they don't look like kind of thugs, but they are nevertheless, they have gone all the way over to justifying violence and thinking that somehow they're on the side of right while also preaching violence. So it will be interesting to see whether university leaders are able to do something with this, given the campus focus of what he was doing. And as you said earlier, the fact that the most intolerant places in society are campuses. There is nowhere else as intolerant. I mean, you could go in your local pub and you could have more free speech. You can go to work and, with your colleagues in the canteen, you could be more free in loads more settings than you could be on a university campus. So the irony of that is absolutely extraordinary.
Jan, you were at the march, the United Kingdom march on Saturday. Well, I decided to go a while ago. I've been to observe the previous gatherings organised by Tommy Robinson, and when this one was advertised, I thought, you can't not go when you're, it's called a free speech rally. I want to go and see if it really is a free speech rally. And I want to see who goes. And I know that lots of Free Speech Union members would have been going on it. And as far as I'm concerned, I go where people are. And so I went and stood with a few friends with placards that said "Je suis Charlie," which actually had been produced
earlier in the year for the 10th anniversary of the Charlie Hebdo massacre, which I was part of a vigil that was marking. And so when Charlie Kirk died last week, we thought, well, actually, they're there to be used. And so I took that to the Whitehall vigil on Friday night and then also again on Saturday. And it was, a phenomenal crowd of people. I was trying to get a sense of what the actual numbers are, because I don't think the police have got it right. They're saying up to 150,000, but loads of people I know who've been on loads of protests over the years are saying there's no way it's 150,000. It's definitely not 1 million, but it may well be 500,000, because I've been reading reports of people who came from out of town, joined it, and then never even got into Whitehall or even over Westminster Bridge, because it was just full the whole time. And I was standing in Whitehall. I didn't walk with the march. I went straight to Whitehall. And once it started filling up, it was really, really full. And at a certain point, I got out of Whitehall, because I always worry about crowds, and not because of the people in it, but just because there's a certain point where a crowd is not in control of where it gets to move. So I kind of came out and stood in Parliament Square. But it was absolutely fascinating. All British working class life was there. That's what I would say. I didn't spot anybody who was probably a school teacher. I saw loads and loads of people who do all the other jobs in British society, as far as I'm concerned. And it was great. We had a lovely response to the placards. Loads of people just thumbs up, coming and patting us on the back. Some people saying, what does that say? My French isn't very good. Or are you French? Because it said Je suis Charlie. Some people read it as Jesus Charlie, because there was quite a religious flavour to the day. And then somebody, it made me laugh, one guy who was standing behind us, who kind of was really, we'd already been chatting to him, and he went, I have to say, I thought you maybe were dealing cocaine, because it said Je suis Charlie. But it was just really good response. People knew about Charlie Hebdo. Loads of people were referencing Charlie Kirk. So quite a lot of people with the images of Charlie Kirk. The chants that went up sometimes were about Charlie Kirk. And but the overall, I think, in defiance of what probably a lot of people thought, it really was a very, very mixed crowd, in the sense of lots of different types of people who must be people who've come from Labour supporting families, people that have come from no political tradition, people who've come from being kind of working class Conservative voters, everything. There will have been people there who were part of the BNP and the NF, but they were always tiny anyway. So I think it was a really mixed. The biggest sense you got was people who feel that they've got no representation.
Yeah.
And it's a long time, I think, since they've felt represented by any of the major parties. So that's why they came out, as far as I can tell.
I was sad I wasn't able to be there just to witness it. But it's the fact that there were so many people there, and it's almost like an unstoppable force of whether the people there were, I know that there were people there who don't particularly like Tommy Robinson as a person, but they care about the country. And you keep hearing people say, I just want to be proud of my country again, and standing up for British values and democracy and free speech. And so it's a shame to see. I don't know how long it will be able to continue with politicians such as Diane Abbott, who's basically written in The Guardian that it was just a sea of racism. Because, like you say, there were people of all walks of life, all different colours, all different backgrounds. And I don't know how long it can continue to be washed in that way, because in all protests you have the minority of extremists, but they're sort of being pinpointed as a representative of the entire crowd. I mean, even if the pro-Palestinian protests that happen on Saturdays, there are some extremists in there, but the vast majority of people are not. And it's unfair to paint both as that. But it's a shame to see some politicians continuing with this line, because it's like they're now sort of shouting into the abyss.
Well, I do think Diane Abbott is just irrelevant. I mean, she was there apparently as part of the the counter protest,
Yeah.
which would have been scary. You don't want to be 5,000 people against whatever it is, 180,000, 200,000 people. That's not a good place to be. And you don't want to be it if you're Diane Abbott. And that's not because you're black, it's because you're Diane Abbott. I mean, that's the thing. So I wouldn't have been Diane Abbott out and about on that day, whereas there were plenty of black and brown faces in the crowd. And I don't think any of them would have had any hassle. And if one person had given them hassle, I think all the other people around them would have stuck up for them. Genuinely, and I'm not being Pollyanna-ish about that. I genuinely think that's the case. Whereas the point where the trouble was, and there were 25 arrests, which is really very, very few given the scale of the thing, were where the two protests met. And the only reason they met is because of the massive amount of people on the United Kingdom march, because at a certain point they couldn't get into Whitehall, the official area, so they came round the back of it, and that's when they then encountered the counter protest. So that was to do with, I think, very silly policing, where they allowed the two protests to get within 100 metres of each other, which is just the dumbest thing ever, and was just inevitably going to kick off. But I mean, you wouldn't have known that had happened when you were in the main section of it. Honestly, you couldn't hear anything. You wouldn't have. I saw some police putting on helmets at some point, and I don't know where there was only like 10 of them, and I don't know where they were going, and apparently they did blockade the south end of Westminster Bridge, which stopped a lot of people getting on because it was full, and then they weren't told where else to go. So people then kind of found other routes into and filled up Parliament Square as well eventually. So, there's obviously blokes there who are drinking cider and lager all day and up for a fight, and every Saturday they probably have a fight with somebody, and if they were on that march they were looking to have a fight. Somebody tried to they told me one guy who was completely off his head said, go back where you came from, because
they thought you were French.
I think it was because he thought I was French maybe, but then he also didn't, even when we said Charlie Kirk, he said, well, he's American. So that was kind of interesting. But then what then happens is this massive bloke behind me goes, "Oi, what are you doing, mate? What are you doing, mate?" And then this guy was just off his head. So, that was really like tiny individuals in a mass of people that were enjoying talking to each other, basically. And that's kind of, even the speeches, a lot of people wouldn't have heard a lot of the speeches because you didn't get anywhere near the screens. So it was a bit odd where there was speeches by these European, very right-wing, sort of nativist European politicians, amongst a lot of other people. But to have a crowd of quite jolly British people who they're angry in general and then very jolly on the day, being addressed in French by Eric Zemmour with a translator, it just doesn't really go down very well.
I didn't realise that was one of the speeches, literally in a different language.
Yeah, he was talking about great replacement theory, and but I don't know how many speakers there were. There were loads, and I didn't hear any in Whitehall. I only heard them when I went back home again and watched them on the live stream. There was a German AfD politician. He did address the crowd in English, but then he was talking about, Britain and Germany's great history, but we're just up from the cenotaph. So it was sort of, it's almost like in order to politicize it, there's nobody in Britain at the moment, politicians, who are able to actually address that crowd. And so they've had to kind of ironically import politicians in to try and give some political shape to it. But actually, it failed to connect. I think there were some cheers, but nothing really that roused the crowd as much as one of Tommy Robinson's mates, called Bloxy, who was called upon to lead the crowd in singing Sweet Caroline. And it was very funny. And then that little girl, Courtney Wright, the girl who wore the Union Jack dress to her school's culture day, she spoke. So she delivered her speech from a little exercise book, which is quite sweet. And then loads of music. So there was a kind of evangelical singer, I don't know who he is, but he had kind of gospel style backing singers who were phenomenal. One of them sang she sang Land of Hope and Glory or Amazing Grace, but it was really, really good. And so there was this sort of mixed, it was kind of festival-y in that sense, not in a way that Glastonbury people would recognise or enjoy, but it was definitely had that kind of feel. So I'm kind of optimistic that a lot of people would have had a very positive experience, and that's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to just dissipate too easily, although they'll have got home and been very disappointed in the way the media covered it, because it just does not reflect, it won't reflect their experience of the day in terms of the numbers that are being said, the emphasis on arrests and police getting injured. It just wouldn't be what people experience. So unless the media gets smart, they're just going to carry on hemorrhaging viewers and listeners, because people are not going to see their experience reflected.
It's very interesting because the way that the certain media platforms are covering it are platforms that do not like the politics of that march. Yet by covering it in the way that they're doing it is going to encourage more of the politics that they don't like. And that's why I was quite impressed with Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper when they were asked about the flag issue. And they both said, yeah, I've got flags up in my house, and I thought that was a very clever way to deal with it. Don't bite, and just say, yeah, you should be proud of your flag. And of course, there are some people who, there are people who fly all sorts of flags who have not very nice views. But we need to not, in my opinion, we shouldn't be going down a route of saying that flag has been categorically hijacked by racists. And Keir Starmer's statement was interesting because it was quite negative of the march, which was different from his response about the flag issue. So, and I actually haven't seen Sadiq Khan's post about it, but apparently it was very neutral, which was great. Just said that
they realise this is why, again, I think it's the net result is positive, because when public pressure is applied. And it isn't just about flags. Free speech was really front and centre, I have to say. It did really feel like we will not let our voice and our concerns continue to be silenced and traduced. It was like a sort of claim for dignity, I think, in a lot of ways. And obviously the flags make it look like an identity kind of issue, which it sort of is. But I think it's more like we are in a democracy. If you say this is a democracy, our voice is equal to anybody else's. And we're not going to stand for continuing to be disrespected. You have to listen to us. And so the chant of the day, which was going up spontaneously all day, was not who the F is Allah or anything like that. Actually, there was a bit of that. Apparently, I didn't hear it. It was Keir Starmer's a wanker. That's what was spontaneously just bursting out all throughout the day. And in fact, Ben Habib, from Advance UK, formerly of Reform and the Brexit Party, he spoke. It was very funny because he started addressing the crowd, and the crowds just started shouting, Keir Starmer's a wanker. So Ben Habib said, well, okay, it isn't in my script, but yes, Keir Starmer is a wanker. So, it was very British in that sense. It was very, very British and quite light-hearted. People would chant and then they're laughing at what they're saying. And I mean, I wouldn't have wanted to be in Downing Street, I must say. I doubt Keir Starmer was there. But it was interesting that Peter Kyle on Sky said, what did he say? That this is a sign that free speech and the freedom of association are alive and well. And you kind of, well, that's interesting. So although we might chuckle ruefully and say, oh yeah, pull the other one, on the other hand, he is at least accepting the terms. He's not saying this isn't about free speech, or these people claim to be acting in the name of free speech, but actually they're this. It was an acceptance that this is what it is, which I think is a step forward, actually. Not that Labour will necessarily be able to survive this, but at the same time, it's a step forward that free speech is legitimised as a claim that people can make. So I thought it kind of just shows you sort of shift the Overton window on these things by people mobilising. So, and all of the other parties as well, so Kemi Badenoch and others, they haven't been able to just condemn this. They've actually, well, in fact, they haven't all condemned it. They've sort of got to try and speak the same language, because these are the demands that people are making, and it is about free speech as much as everything else. Is this kind of absolute foundational statement of equality in a democracy. Equality in the real sense of political equality. So, yeah, I'd recommend people read Trevor Phillips's take on this, which was he did a video for Sky News, but he's in the Times today. And
that was a bit controversial, though, wasn't it? Because they, for some reason, took it down off X, and he said what was most extraordinary is how normal the people were. And it's like, yeah, these are
what
normal.
What do you expect?
What were you imagining?
Yeah, but on the other hand, it's it is interesting, and he was saying it's unignorable, and so that's progress as far as I'm concerned. So that's all good. I mean, Trevor's obviously always been good on free speech, so it's more just the fact that there are people who are saying, look, you cannot just carry on somehow being able to ignore this and sweep it under the carpet and just malign people, because they're not going anywhere, and they are right. They're not necessarily far right. They are right on some things, wrong on others, right on others. So, yeah, I saw somebody in a Free Speech Union hoodie, so I ran over to him and said hello, and yeah, that was nice. Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. We live in interesting times, Connie.
Yeah. And of course, finally, I guess some more hope is that Toby Young has been appointed by Kemi Badenoch to lead a policy review on laws that are restricting freedom of speech. So that will be released at the end of this year, hopefully. And he will be sort of putting forward a recommendation as to what we should do in terms of legislation to protect free speech. And hopefully, there isn't really anyone better to do it. We've done. I can't think of an organisation that's done more for free speech, and not just on the individual basis, but now in Parliament, Toby in the House of Lords, our general campaigning about legislation. I think that we can feel quite confident that not to toot our own horn, so to speak, but I think that there couldn't really be a better person to lead it with the expertise that we have. Obviously other people will be consulted as well, but obviously it's led by Toby, and so that's another step forwards in the right direction.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant, and it does show as well that free speech is becoming central to what all political parties are going to have to do at the next election. And insofar as, so the question I was mulling over is, can free speech unite the nation? Can free speech become the thing that is a restatement of democracy? And then once you've got that, you can all disagree about everything else. But can we agree on free speech being foundational? And if the parties really take it seriously as well, and don't just play lip service and use it as a slogan just in a shallow kind of way, but actually do what Kemi Badenoch's done by seriously looking at a review of law, then that's great. Really, really good. And it's testimony to what Toby's established in the last 5 years, that we're in a position to be the people that take that forward, as you say. Yeah. So that's really, really brilliant. So good. And that's down to our members.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, who shared the vision. So brilliant. Good. All right. Well, out of tragedy comes hope, hopefully. I'm sounding like an evangelical pastor. My grandfather was a Methodist minister. It must come through the blood at some point. Good. All right. Well, have a good week, Connie.